What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another draft to break down for the Detroit Lions. And today, we are on to the defensive side of the ball in round 2, but back in Alabama. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to the video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're back with another draft video, and I'm very excited about this one. And I really was since the draft pick. I think I said on draft night that I felt like we may look back and say that this is the best player that the Lions drafted. And after watching this player putting together this video in his own role, I still kind of believe it's a very good chance that we're going to look back on this one. It gave me similar vibes to when we took St. Brown. When we took St. Brown, I feel like around the community, there was a lot of sense like, yeah, he may have been round 4, but St. Brown's a dog. Like, everybody kind of had that. And maybe that was because we knew we needed a receiver, and it was just like, we're going to cling on to whoever it is. But there just seemed to be that sense around Lions fans, like, man, this guy's going to be good. Like, everybody just assumed that he was going to ball out in his rookie season. I feel like that. I know we talked about that on this channel. We had him, set for like, oh, he's going to lead a team in receiving yards and all these things. And at the end of the season, he just absolutely took off for the Lions. I get a very similar sense here with Brian Branch. Now, the difference is that this is not necessarily a position that I feel like the Lions needed heading into the draft, but it almost just felt like he was still there. He was still there, and the Lions just said, you know what, let's just go get the guy, okay? They traded up with the Green Bay Packers. They moved up 3 spots. They gave up pick number 159 to move from 48 to 45, which, if you're looking at the trade value chart, technically, based on the points, the Lions won that trade, but it just depends on what these players turn into. The Packers turned the 48th pick into Luke Musgrave, and then they came back at pick 159, took Dontavian Wicks, the receiver out of Virginia, and of course, we get Brian Branch. So it just depends on what those turn out to be. I think it was actually the same thing, and we'll double check this when we go to the video, but I think it was the same case with Broderick Martin as well, that the Lions, according to the value chart, won the value of the trade just based on picks alone. He's only played college football for 3 seasons. He's not a redshirt player. He's a true junior. It's Alabama. So usually when you have that, you got a guy that's just a stud. When they're a high draft pick, they've only been in for 3 years. Usually you're looking at a player that's just an absolute stud in terms of talent, and then it's like, okay, we'll see what maybe he becomes, but we know he's extremely talented. But this guy was extremely sound, played a very valuable position for this Alabama defense, was trusted in that position, produced like crazy, and now he's a Detroit Lion. And it just feels like the guy kept falling, and Brad Holmes said, dude, let's just go get the guy. He's still right there. Let's just go get him. Stop playing around with it. We didn't think he'd be here. But like Brad Holmes said in his presser, he was a guy that did things that we kind of anticipate that you're going to be asked to do within our defense, basically. Like, the role that he played with Alabama is going to be similar to the role that he plays in the NFL. But it was also kind of sounded like, well, he may not start right away. Stanley was a round 2 pick. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to start right away. I mean, what does starting really mean? It's all about the snap count. So I don't know how many snaps he's going to get year 1, but I do feel like the long-term outlook here with Brian Branch is going to be very successful with the Lions. It's my very early sense on this. I'm very positive about this draft pick, and I will throw this one little note out there quick, just a quick little background. We know that in today's NFL, a lot of teams are not in base packages, okay? A lot of teams are in sub packages a majority of the time. It's just how it goes, and it's been like that for years now. A majority of the time, you at least have usually 5 defensive backs on the field, and you only have front 6 players. Usually it's just front 7 because that's a base package. But now teams live, for the most part, not in a base package. To put that in perspective, back in 2020, the last year Aaron Glenn was with the New Orleans Saints as well as Dan Campbell, that defense was only in a base package or base personnel 9% of the time. 9%. That's it. 9% of the time they were in base personnel. 60% nickel package. 29% dime package. So that's what they played in just the majority of the time. Played a lot of cover 3, played a lot of different coverages, a lot of passing off routes, a lot of intelligent back end players. It's something that I've touched on before about the defensive backs. But also, again, little note I'll throw out here, listening to David Shaw speak on this and how he said, vets, they basically win, right? Veterans win the Super Bowl. And when you look at the Lions defensive backs, it's really the first time that we've invested heavily in the cornerback position in any offseason. Since Brad's got here now in year 3 is the first time we really hit that position pretty hard, but we didn't do it in the sense of necessarily draft picks. Brian Branch is one of those guys, but it was more so in free agency. It was proven guys. It was like, hey, we know what they're going to be. Mosley, it's about health, but we know what Sutton's going to be. We know what CJ's about. It was proven players at the cornerback position that were basically going to be smart in the back end, right? Will Harris came back. Why? Because he's very intelligent in the back end. Switching off routes, you're going to be playing different zone coverages. You're going to be playing off-man coverage. You're going to be asked to press. You're going to be asked to switch, assignments during the play. All of those things, and that's what it was with the Saints defense. And the reason I bring up that stat is because that's just kind of what I expect for the Lions defense to look like this year. Like, looked at the Lions defense and said, how do we get the best players on the field? Based on the way we've drafted and how we've invested, you got to think a lot of times it would be kind of maybe 4 defensive linemen, but more so 2 off-ball linebackers, and that's why you raise the floor. You get a stud like Jack Campbell that can play 3 downs. I feel like a lot of Alex Anzalone. But then it's now at this point, it's going to be the defensive backs, and I assume that's what we're going to see a lot this year from the Lions. So a draft pick like this, whether or not he's a starter, we'll see. He's going to find a field at some point. Definitely has special teams ability, but I think especially when you look at the long-term outlook, we're going to be very happy about this draft pick for the Lions, and I think he could be immediately productive. Just depends on how many snaps he's able to get year 1 for the Lions, because you do have guys like CJ in place, and if Tracy comes back healthy, you don't really want to kick Kirby off the field. It could be difficult to find a spot, depending on the package that you're in. Brian Branch, he's a 5 foot, basically 11.5 defensive back from Alabama. We'll call him that, but he really played that slot cornerback position. I assume that's where he's going to play in the NFL, just based on... Now, that's not to say he can't play other positions. I'll talk about that in my breakdown, but I think that's where he'll play a lot for the Lions and in the NFL. Wearing the number 14, as you'll see in the clips. As I said, he's only 21 years old, only been in college for 3 seasons, which is crazy. He made 3 starts as a freshman in 2020 as a 4-star recruit out of high school, but played in all 12 games. And then 2021, you can see at the bottom, he had a Defensive Player of the Week award against Cincinnati. 2022, he has tons of awards, which we'll touch on. You look at some of the testing numbers there. He ran a 4.58 40, 1.56 10-yard split. You can see the arm length, the hand size at the bottom. 14 bench press reps, which is, it's fine from a guy that size. 34.5-inch vertical. Nothing outstanding there. The 4.45 20-yard shuttle wasn't great. All right, the testing scores weren't insane. It wasn't like that, but I would say it's pretty similar to when I looked at a guy like Mike Hughes. And you can see the numbers here. I'll go through Mike Hughes. Mike Hughes was listed in at 5'10", 189, so similar in terms of size. He ran a 4.53 coming out, 1.58 10-yard split, 20 bench press reps, which is a big difference, and a 35.5-inch vertical. So I think there's a lot of similar testing there with a guy like Mike Hughes. And if you think about it, if you talk about, before we got CJ Gardner-Johnson, he may play at safety depending on the health of our, defensive backs. Tracy's hoping to be back by training camp and really out there. But if you look at the defensive backs of the Lions, it's something that we've been trying to find over these last 2 years is who is our slot cornerback. And to start off with AJ Parker as a UDFA, then he wasn't in 2021. But even though we didn't even know it was going to be AJ coming into the year, right? We had Corn Elder, we had Nick Alworlby-Coleman, we brought in some vets, but we rolled with AJ Parker. It wasn't the best season, but it wasn't terrible either. Then this past year, we kind of bring in Mike Hughes, and even though we didn't see it a ton before the season, it was like Mike Hughes has done this a little bit. We're going to put him there. He's got the body type for it. We're going to try it. And it wasn't great. I think there was some communication breakdowns. The first game that he, technically started at slot was one of the first plays. There was, a breakdown against Seattle, and he gave up a nice little chunk there. But he kind of had that role for a little bit, and then he didn't have that role, and then ultimately Will Harris took over that position. And I don't know if Will Harris is, the perfect build for a slot cornerback, but certain matchups, certain situations he could do. He's physical. He can match up with bigger guys. He's long. He's got straight line speed, but he would play the run well, and he was super intelligent. So it worked out for us at that position. But really, it's been kind of a carousel of trying to figure out who's going to be that guy for us. And to the numbers that I just hit on, if you just take it the Saints, for example, and essentially 89% of the time, you're in either nickel or dime, that guy's going to be on the field. That basically makes him a starter. So you need to have a guy that can play that role that you feel good about. The statistics, and these are just 2022 statistics. These are according to Pro Football Focus. It's usually harder to get defensive back stats, so I took a look at theirs for the advanced stats. 36 receptions on 57 targets, 69.3 passer rating, 2 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. One of those touchdowns was Tennessee. 9 forced incompletions, which I believe was 8th according to PFF, and then also the most coverage stops according to PFF with 19. 74 tackles according to PFF to only 3 missed tackles, which actually seems accurate. I think I counted 3 missed tackles. I watched all of his game from this past year. I think I only counted 3 missed tackles, so that seems pretty accurate. And then I put the snap counts from the last 2 years. 568 snaps were in the slot this past year to only 25 at the deep safety position. And then 2021, similar, 411 snaps at the slot position, only 49 of those snaps at the deep safety position. So I know he's kind of listed as a safety by a lot of people, and that's not to say that he couldn't do that. I think his skill set, when you look at some of the key traits there, he has those, and we'll talk about that at the end of the video, but he's played a majority of the time in that slot, in that nickel role, just like Brad Holmes touched on. All right, so let me dive into this player, give you things that I like about him, maybe things that I don't love about his game. But with that being said, I don't have any red flags, especially when you consider the position that he plays. You can see how a guy like this could potentially fall, right? He's not an outside corner. He's not a guy that's going to match up with your top, receiver on the outside. He's also not this huge slot that's kind of like a hybrid. He's not necessarily that. So you can see how a guy like this can fall. We've seen that in the past. I mean, CJ Gardner-Johnson went round 4 when he came out. Before we get into the pass game side, as I have a pretty good amount of notes on that, I want to start off with the run defense first, because I gave some like super high grades here when I was going through the player, and I actually gave my highest grade to any player that I've given so far in one specific area, and that's the run support. This is the highest grade I've given to any player in one specific area that we've went through that maybe could come close in a specific areas, like a Jahmyr Gibbs. Like maybe there are certain traits that a guy's really good at, but I feel like this guy, Brian Branch, is pushing the elite category as a run support player. I really don't have any questions about this translating to the next level in the role that he plays. Even if he was backed into a safety alignment, I expect that he'd be really good in this area as well. Unless you put him as an off-ball linebacker, I see him being pretty dominant here in the NFL, and it translating really well, and I put like close to an elite grade for him at this spot. So with that being said, I want to start off with the run defense first, because I love it. You've seen the stats, the amount of tackles that he has. I understand, they're going to be involved a lot. Teams try to get to the outside, quick passes, any outside runs. These guys are going to be involved a lot in the run game. However, it's still a ton of tackles for a guy as a slot cornerback, especially if you look at that Kansas State game. He had like 12 tackles in that game according to their website, but he's got a lot of production, and then he doesn't miss tackles either. Like, we understand that, but then when you dive into the different aspect of stopping the run, he's really good at a lot of them. I don't have a lot of issues with it. So we'll start there first at taking on blocks, and this is an area where I was super surprised. I didn't expect this. Even going back to 2021 and some of the games that I watched there, I was still like, whoa, this guy can really get off of blocks. He can hold his ground against blocks. He can shed blocks. He positions himself well. Like, this is incredible. So we'll start there first. The ability to stay clean through blocks, the contact balance, I know that comes up a lot with a running back, but it's definitely something that should be brought up here with Brian Branch. He's never on the ground seemingly when he's taking on blocks. Offensive linemen, he takes on the big guys, he takes on receivers a lot more often at the second level, tight ends, things like that. But even when taking on offensive linemen, you notice the contact balance, the way that he's able to lower his center of gravity, push through, still make a play, impact the run, all of those types of things. So when I say, the run support here, it's also, the underneath passing game. It's also shedding blocks and making plays, just in tackling the ball carrier in general is where I really like him. So then you also talk about the understanding of break points, how to get off of contact. This is a blitz, right? It's a pass rush, so it's a little bit different, but it's kind of the same idea of that understanding. You see a little rip through or here off the edge to get himself clean, like that kind of thing. It stands out as a run defender, and I think it just kind of translates in this instance to kind of showcase what I'm talking about. I think he has fantastic core strength. I know it doesn't show up in terms of like the testing numbers, 14 bench press reps. It's not going to represent the core strength that I think that he brings, but it shows up when you just watch him play. The ability to, again, stack and shed receivers, tight ends. Sometimes guys get lazy out there blocking. Well, you better not against this guy, because he's going to eat it up all day long, and he did against everybody that he matched up with. I think a lot of it came back to the core strength, the ability to hold his ground, stack, shed, throw guys off. He's not the biggest dude. He doesn't have the greatest length either, but it's the technique, it's the core strength, it's the want to, all of those things that you love. He drops his weight, shoots his hands. You see it against Vanderbilt there, shoots his hands into contact. He keeps himself clean on the edge, kind of with that inside arm, almost like an edge rusher would. Now, sure, he's got a little bit shorter arm, so sometimes he can get kind of sucked in a little bit, but he has that kind of technique like an edge rusher would when he's pushing up on the edge of a play. Good angles into blocks. Now, this is in kind of two-way here. First off, if he's trying to stack into the block, then shed receivers, tight ends especially, you see a very good contact point, the way that he kind of drops his weight, the way that he gets leverage, his real pop and strength into the contact, shoots his hands accurately, and he's always squaring himself up to contact. But where he also does a great job is whether or not he's trying to just run by the player or still, kind of stack and shed the block. You also see how those kind of like late movements into the point of attack, which give blockers problems, receivers, second level blockers, whether that's a fullback that's trying to pull around and get up on him, whatever that may be. You see some of the kind of late movement where it makes it difficult for someone to square him up and get good shots on him, and he's able to like sidestep just last second, make a play. You saw it against Kansas State when they ran a little sweep there, and he had kind of like the last second move, then the finish. It's things like that, right, from both aspects. I don't think he's the best blitzer out there, but again, I think it kind of showcases things that you like about him as a run defender as well. The slipperiness here as he's kind of running the stunt, but it's also the lateral quickness as well. That's a legit part of his game. Lateral quickness is huge. I think it shows up in press coverage, but also as a blitzer as well, but also as a run defender. It's like the immediate reactive ability, and I think a huge part of it comes back to every aspect of his game. He's always on his toes. And this is the kind of thing you see all the time. You see the tight end coming around and he sets to contain, but then last second he's able to react, pop inside, dip the shoulder, and he just lays out this running back. Hands inside, keeps his eyes up, which is huge. He's got a nose for a football. You don't see him like getting contact with a blocker and then he's kind of closing his eyes and the guy runs right by him. That kind of thing rarely happens. I mean, every once in a while you'll get him somewhat lost in the traffic as seemingly he can't see where the ball is, but when he gets into blocks, you see a nice job of seeing into the backfield, keeping his eyes up the best that he can as a run defender as well. And then you like how he presses the line of scrimmage. Now, you get like rare examples where he's a little bit late and caught on his heels, but for the most part, when he pushes up and presses that line of scrimmage for the front side, you'll see him hold his ground inside the box where, you know, a receiver like against Kansas State, they can't come on an angle and push him out of the play. The way that he really steps in there, sits down, and he's like, no, you're not moving me. I'm holding my ground. He does that a ton, filling gaps against the run. We asked our guys to do that a lot. You think back to last year, especially when we started to change a little bit and we started putting our cornerbacks, you know, for example, if they would get motioned in, we put him, you know, head up on a tight end like a 6 technique, and they'd have to stand in there and play the run. We would ask them to support the run, and this is the type of player that did a lot of that, where, you know, he'd be kept clean for the most part, but he would have to stick his nose in there and play inside the tackle box, and he's done that. To me, it's the insane contact balance. Like, I can't stress this enough. It's unreal. He's never on the ground. The weird flexibility. It's like back flexibility. He's tough as nails. I mean, there was a couple times I saw him get dinged up. There was I can't remember the exact game where he was clearly, it looked like he hurt his back a little bit, but he played the next play, didn't really show anything, like any signs of injury, but he was kind of just like, I'm going to shake it off and get back out there. Then they took him out of the game because I think it was kind of a blowout, but it's that kind of thing. It's the toughness, but it's like the weird flexibility, the ability for him to get upfield against the tackle, but not get pushed out of the play. Right tackles, they kind of get him squeezed out and they're like, okay, I'm just going to kind of push him out of the pocket and then we can, you know, go right off my shoulder. The running back can, and he's able to like step on the brakes, himself back into the play, somehow get back to the running back because he keeps his eyes up. That when he does that, and he does it multiple times when you watch him, it's like, whoa, how in the world did he just do that? The lower body, but also in the back flexibility to lean, balance through contact, fight through arms, like that kind of thing. It's crazy. Continuing with the run support, but also as a blitzer as well, I'll kind of start to throw this in there. You see the snap count timing, you kind of have a sense of this, and I think there's two good things here. First off, when he's blitzing from like a slot corner alignment, it usually doesn't show it, so, you know, for example, he can get the quarterback, sometimes it doesn't recognize it, but then also when he starts to kind of work up before the snap, you don't see him run off sides. I don't even think there was one example I could point to where he went off sides in all of the games that I watched, like 14, 15 games. I don't think there's one example of him going off sides, but instead you'll see him kind of sense it. He'll push up on the line, and sometimes, you know, receivers, tight alignment, sometimes they're in a tight end alignment, they can't even get a hand on him because he's already into the backfield by the time the ball is snapped, but he plays really under control, disciplined as a run defender. Now, one thing I do, you know, have a little knock here for sure. There's a couple little knocks that I have. It's really little things. One thing, I feel like there's times where he can leave the play on the table, especially when he's on the edge. If there's a play to be made in the backfield where instead of being disciplined and kind of holding his contain, he should just shoot and make the play. And there's sometimes where he'll kind of hang back and let it happen, let it get upfield a little bit, where I think he's had opportunities. Not a huge issue. It shows up from time to time, but for the most part, what you like is that he plays really under control when he's playing the contained role. He doesn't get flat-footed, as I said. He saw it against Texas. Ole Miss is a fantastic example. Just plays like this. I mean, just plays like this. You're like, wow. That he contains on the edge, then he squares himself back into the play, gets back inside, and he does it. There's multiple examples of this, and he makes another play on the running back. It's like, how does he do it? There's a feisty finish here. Now, he can get a little bit high sometimes, occasionally on his tackles. He becomes a little bit of a drag-down tackler. It's a little knock that I have in there as well, as occasionally when he gets high, he becomes a drag-down tackler. Bigger running backs or tight ends can make that happen. Hits with force, but that does happen for him if he doesn't get low on contact, so that is something that pops up as well. You'll see him adjust his angles into contact, try to keep his legs turning through that contact, but really have some force, especially when the ball carrier is a little bit off balance. With some of the discipline there, this is you know, football, especially at college level, a lot of RPOs, read options, there's a lot of mesh point, and for him, he was put in a lot of spots where he would have to handle that. It's like, hey, you know, you got to contain here, don't give up the edge, don't bite on the back and let the quarterback take off, that kind of thing. Well, you would see him attack with control, but also urgency. He'd get there in a hurry, but then get himself under control while at the same time being disciplined to not dive inside, and he had a lot of that, you know, mesh work, but it's really that ability to quickly plant and react laterally. Again, the quickness laterally is real. real, and then he just sells out to finish. I mean, that's the thing that I like as well. Like, this guy just goes for it. He's like, I'm going for it. He just leaps and kind of just takes that leap. Like, there's like literally no fear to hit somebody. How he attacks with force into tackles, like he absolutely just knock some dudes. Now, he's not like the biggest or strongest guy, so again, running backs, tight ends, if he gets a little high, if he kind of sells out, but he's still high on the tackle, he's above the waist, he'll become a drag down guy, and he needs other guys to kind of come along for the ride. Sometimes he can be taken for a little bit of a ride for a few yards. But the initial force is real at the point of attack. He attacks blocks the same ways, which I like as well. You saw it on the screen here against ULM, the way that he's just flying into the screen for some reason, because he just attacks. He gets low on the Ole Miss running back. Great angles into contact. He doesn't miss many tackles. Now, there was a couple, I think, one of them showed up from a deep safety alignment when he gets downhill. And there's sometimes running backs or ball carriers will just fall down because there's nowhere really to go. He presses up with good angles, but he gets under control, breaks down, and then he has that lateral quickness to kind of just match. He just mirrors basically whoever the ball carrier is. And then if they just kind of stop moving, or as he slowly closes the distance, then he'll kind of just launch into contact and finish it off. You see it against quarterbacks. And I think that's where you get those rare missed tackles, and it happens when he's working downhill. He gets from point A to point B. It's the fastest line to get to the ball carrier, but then it's if that ball carrier makes an exact move at the time that he is setting himself in position to make the tackle, and he can't reset basically twice in a row, that's where you can get him to miss some tackles. But he's really efficient as a tackler with good technique, low out as an open field tackler to get both legs, wrap up with force, and basically not allow any leakage. Again, I think there's times where he leaves stuff out there because, like, oh, if you just hit him, like, you could have the sack instead of letting him even get the ball off. But you take that because you get a disciplined player in return. And I think you'd rather have a guy that makes mostly every tackle rather than a guy that's going to give you some good ones and give you some ugly ones as well and let things break out to big plays. We saw that last year, gave us some issues at times. But I love the angles into contact. You see the tackle against the LSU running back, the hit, he was putting some hits on Deuce Vaughn now out of Kansas State. Big hit on A-Chain. But I think that's what you like. He takes it in stages. You see there, he kind of slows down into contact with that receiver, and then he takes off, and he can't get any hands on him or get a clean block on him, and then he kind of just keeps himself clean with that inside hand. That's what you like about Branch here, is he takes it one step at a time. He's not like, see the ball, get the ball, and I'm not going to focus on this block, and then I'm slowing down. No, he's going to handle the block first, then go make a play. Now, I think this one is definitely beneficial that his teammate was kind of standing right there working to help him because he gets high on this tackle. He does not win this leverage battle. As I said, he can get high on some of these tackles, but you do like how he comes flying across and with the support of his teammate, lays a nice little hit. But he gets that sense, like when he really knows that he has help, he gets a little more aggressive. Now, again, another little knock that I have is I think especially when he's kind of running in the alley and he does have support, whether that's edge contain or whatever that may be, and he can get a little more aggressive. Sometimes I feel like he doesn't, and he still kind of gets a little flat and just kind of becomes like, okay, I'm going to break down, make this tackle, instead of just shooting it and making the play. But if he really knows that the support is there, there was an example on the sideline where he had, the inside defender and he had the sideline to help him and he could just get aggressive. He lays the hit. But there are times where I feel like he kind of just slows down a little bit into contact. You want to just see him go hit the guy. And then also as a blitzer, translating here a little bit, I like how he gets slippery. You love the discipline because what he does, he's always in pass lanes. I mean, he didn't knock as many passes down as I would have liked. He doesn't have the greatest length either, so that's understandable. But he gets in the passing lanes. Like, he's not going to just run after the quarterback, let the ball get off. He's going to jump in passing lanes. He has a sense of it. If it's a fake, as soon as that arm starts to kind of go back, he's getting in the passing lane. There was a couple PBUs, and even if he didn't get the ball, there were times where it's going to affect what the wide receiver can see. You get a lot of those quick hitters, so when you're bringing that slot blitz, that can be just as effective because you getting there late, hitting the quarterback does nothing. But at least if you can get in the pass lane, maybe make it difficult for the receiver to see it until the ball's there, helps out the defensive back, that kind of thing. But as a blitzer, my biggest issue for him is success as a blitzer is he didn't have a consistent way to beat backs. When he got wind up one-on-one with the running back and it was like, hey, you versus me, there wasn't really much of a plan. There wasn't a way to win those battles. He didn't have many wins there. He likes to take those nice angles, work out late, kind of the late like side step, then get to the quarterback that way. Slippery, sometimes those inside stunts, but there wasn't a lot of true ways to beat even just running backs one-on-one. There wasn't a lot of true ways to do that, and for me, that's kind of the issue that you have. That's the biggest issue as a blitzer, is he doesn't have a true way to win. If you give him a one-on-one, that's not necessarily saying that he's going to win that matchup. Right now, he's not winning that matchup. Usually he has to be more clean than anything, or the tackle takes a bad angle and he can kind of slip around the edge and kind of fool him a little bit by pressing inside, but that's the main way that he wins. And then I have slight knocks as well in pursuit. Don't have questions about the effort. You see him track down the A&M quarterback, but I think you lose some urgency when he's in pursuit at times. I think a lot of these examples, he would not make the tackle anyway, like there's no shot. But when he's on the opposite side of the field, he starts to really pull back, and he starts to look like he's just jogging, and the pursuit pulls back, and you just it's like when he feels he's out of the play, the effort seems to really pull back. With that said, I don't know if there's one of those examples where I'd say he could have actually made the play here, but it is one of the knocks that stood out early when watching him that I noted. Not something that's like, oh, that cost him right there, but it is something that I have noted, as I think there's at times where you notice in pursuit he starts to kind of really dial back. There's really not a lot of missed tackles. The way he takes on blocks is incredible as a guy at his size. I love his run support, the run game defense, really just tackling as a whole, making plays underneath. It ties into the FBI, which we'll get to. But yeah, run game, run support, my highest grade. We move it to the coverage side. I think it's important to kind of keep in mind what Brad Holmes said when they took this player, when he talked about how his role at Alabama, playing in that slot role, what they asked of him, how they asked him to play in coverage, but I think also as in the run as well, how that he feels like it's kind of going to be similar to what they're going to ask of their player at that position for the Lions. And I do think it's going to look somewhat similar to what we saw from the Saints 2020. Own off-man press. Like, you have to play a lot of different alignments. You have to communicate. You're going to be switching off a lot of routes. You're going to be playing with leverage. You have to know where your help is. When do I need to switch this route? When do I pass it off? When do I dive? Like, all of those types of things you're going to be asked of, I believe, within this defense, right? So there's going to be a lot of moving parts, and that's where, when you look at him, I liked it for Will Harris. I think that's a big part of his game. So we'll kind of break it down a little bit. I'll try to fly through it. You start with some of the press coverage. I have a little bit less notes here. You don't get that really as much from the slot because a lot of times the guys aren't on the line of scrimmage. You just don't see it a lot. You know, two-way goes, that kind of thing. He wasn't put in a ton of situations where he had to defend a two-way go as often. And again, I think with the Lions, when you bring in a guy like Jack Campbell, with the safeties that we have, the way we're going to roll post-snap, a lot of times you're going to try to allow those guys to play with leverage, right? Helping, there's help in the inside, right? Force them that way. Force them outside. Whatever it may be, like, you're going to help play with leverage. I think a lot of times we started to see that some last year, from linebackers and slots, where it was like, okay, you have it, and if it runs vertical, you pass to the safety, then you dive underneath, or you go to this, whatever it may be. So I think you get a lot of that. But just as a press corner in general, what I like about him from his alignment, again, specifically, is I think he's very patient into the first break. Like, that's huge. I think it was even better in 2022. It was still there in 2021. But it's the patience at the line of scrimmage. The guy reads the waist of the receiver, and this shows up from every coverage type, and he just does not buy on eye candy at all. And that's huge, because if you're lunging and you're biting, you're going to get yourself into trouble really quickly, especially with a guy that has a two-way go, or really a three-way go, I should say. He can get upfield, go right, go left. When a guy has options and you're biting and lunging on kind of the first step off the line of scrimmage, that's when you're going to get into trouble. He doesn't buy like any of the eye candy, and I think what's nice is the lateral quickness that he has, the ability to move laterally with quickness, not get tangled up in his feet, change directions, but kind of launch off the line while staying very balanced and not biting on the eye candy is what helps him a ton there. He's matchup sound against a bunch, so a lot of times, you'll see like, okay, the guy that's pressed up, he's got to take him. If the whatever receiver kind of releases this way, this guy takes that. Cover it based on kind of how they release. So for him, I thought you saw a very matchup sound cornerback in that sense. You saw it against Texas A&M. It's good first step quickness laterally to match underneath. The drags, you saw it against A&M, and then you saw it also against Ole Miss here, running this slant, even though it was a little delayed. To me, he's definitely more quick than fast, more reactive quickness than he is in a straight line. Like, he can get into troubles in some straight line matchups from this position when they attack the seam, but for the most part, there's real quickness to match underneath, and that's what it's about when you're playing this role, when you're asked to cover like this. But again, I think there's going to be a lot of times where you're playing to your help, playing to your leverage, playing your support, and you have to just understand, where do I need to be, right? Where do I need to drop? What do I need to see? And that's the biggest part, which I'm going to show some specific examples of here next. So moving to off coverage a little bit more, fast eyes in coverage, fast eyes in off man coverage. You see just his eyes are always on a swivel, right? Seeing wide receiver, seeing ball, seeing man, that kind of thing. And then you see it like if a receiver shows a block, for example, his eyes will start to kind of shift to the quarterback. Receiver gets kind of a release that's a little bit more laxed, or they're showing kind of block. Then his eyes may transition a little bit back to the quarterback. quarterback to sense like, okay, is he about to throw a screen here? Like, what is this going to look like? Where's the ball going? So his eyes are very fast. They're always moving, that kind of thing. You saw it against Texas A&M when they try to set up a screen. You also saw it against Texas A&M when he's passing off the tight end over top, and then he slides down for this crosser here. You love that, right? How his eyes are just on a swivel, passes off the tight end, then he slides back underneath, takes away the crosser. They're switching a lot of things. Again, it's what I expect with this Lions defense. We started to see it a little bit last year as well. This position's asked to change a lot on the fly. Our safety up over top, being more aggressive underneath. Like I have from off coverage, I do feel like his eyes can get a little bit overly aggressive watching into the backfield, specifically when there's pre-snap movement. I think Ole Miss was a good example. When there's movement, pre-snap, fast motions, and his eyes tend to kind of lurk a little bit back there, especially if the matchup changes. He tends to lurk a little bit in the backfield. But again, you talk about the FBI of the player. How about the interception against Kansas State, right? They're running a double slant on his side. He's sitting outside leverage. There's safety, over top in the inside. They did this a lot where he would pass it off to the inside safety. But just look at this. When the slant breaks inside, he gives it to the safety. But again, his eyes, are also seeing the quarterback at the same time. So as he switches that off, he's watching the quarterback stare down this outside receiver. He releases as the quarterback lets go. He plants, redirects. He jumps this pass, picks it off. I think there's a similar situation against Ole Miss when he's making a run stop and his eyes are just everywhere. But then you have to tie that in with the football intelligence. So this is just a huge part of his game, the instincts of his game. You love his adjustments to getting the same look. There's two examples that I'll showcase here. The first one that I want to show is much quicker, but it's against Texas where they're running this RPO, sort of a fake screen look that breaks into a slant here from his assignment. Now, what you saw is the first time around, they kind of gave him this look, and all of a sudden, because the receiver's showing that he's going to block, his eyes tend to get a little bit more towards the quarterback. He's late to the play, and then he's unable to make the play, and they complete a slant on him. The second time around, they gave him basically the exact same look. This time, you see his eyes much more disciplined to stay with the receiver that's showing block, and then he's able to jump much quicker, minimize the delay to plant and drive on the football. The second time around, he gets a pass breakup. And I think that kind of idea, and you see it in another example, which is I don't know if it's a better one, but it's a much more drawn out example. But that's kind of the example of what you get. Like, he's not going to get beat the same time twice in the exact same way. He's going to adapt in some way. Now, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But he's going to adjust. Like, and that's huge because he's not just going through the motions. He's clearly seeing what's going on. And like, okay, I saw that before. Like, let me play it a little bit differently. There's a real recognition to his game, and even whether or not the results are great all the time or not, it's just kind of the sense of what's going on around him is what I think you pick up on really quickly, and I think that's a great example just to kind of showcase that. But continuing with some of the off-coverage stuff, I have fluid in his mirror matchability from off-coverage. He's able to carry his leverage responsibilities from that spot. He takes those short little steps from off-coverage, but again, it's kind of that quickness to match. It's very fluid. He does a nice job, and when he's able to stay low and keep his pad level low and not start to rise. I thought at Mulder towards the beginning of the season or 2021 when his pads could rise a little bit over his toes, but really for the most part he does a good job sitting, small steps. He's able to react. There's really when he's low, there's really no wasted movement from the plant to drive because he's got those quick small steps. Huge part of his game is reading body language, which we'll talk about. But one of the knocks here, again from off coverage, is that he can be forced to play a little bit on his heels. You'll see this a little bit against speed receivers. I thought you saw a guy like Jalen Hyatt. He had some issues here. He gave up one of the touchdowns in this game. And whether or not it was all his fault, right, there's some of those that are like, ooh, I don't know if that's all him. But some of those speed slots that they put him against him, if he's manned up, you'll see he has to give a little bit more ground. He has to back up a little bit, understanding his limitations. But when he doesn't, then you can absolutely run by him. As I would like to see him press a little bit more when he's sitting outside leverage, press the stem of the route a little bit more, squeeze it a little bit more, and allow himself to get into the play because sometimes he just can't get to the football because he's giving too much ground to slight little movements because he doesn't necessarily have the best speed up the seam, that kind of thing. Effortless matchup, pre-snap, for example, the Ole Miss, they had the motion across, and then you see him just effortlessly. Like, there's no confusion. It's just like, okay, that guy moved, I have him, now you have him. And could improve communication there, and that way he could become more vocal and be like, hey, I'm doing this, you do that, because there were times where there was some definitely matchup issues, specifically in some, switch releases, but he knows where he's supposed to be in terms of just matchups, pre-snap based on movement that happens, even if it's fast motions right before the snap. Continuing on, then you see him match up with some of the bigger tight ends, that kind of thing. He plays physical. He plays a very physical physical style. He's the guy that kind of initiates contact. He's much smaller. He's not, I don't think you look at him and say, like, if you had a big nickel and a small nickel, he's not the big nickel. He's more of the small nickel. CJ would be more of the big nickel, even though he's only 5'11", but he's like just built a little bit differently. This player I wouldn't necessarily put into that category, but he does attempt to play bigger than his size, and he knows when he has these matched up clearly because he plays it a little bit different. There's some physicality that he tries to bring to the table. You saw it against K-State. He initiates contact, although a little bit of a lack of length. You saw it against Tennessee, got a PI, kind of got posted up by the tight end there. He just doesn't have the length to get to the football, and you could see there he was called for a pass interference, getting a little bit overly aggressive. Some of the other little knocks that I have within his game in coverage, we'll touch on zone here in a second, is I feel like he can position himself a little bit better earlier with some of the rub routes that they throw at him, specifically from off coverage. Angles can get a little stretched out, and I don't think he has the best acceleration from the plant to the drive. The transition can be smooth, and it can be very little wasted movement, but the acceleration I don't think is elite. I think it's just average to good. So when those angles get too far because of a rub route that's created, and all of a sudden he's too far away from the ball, like the Kansas State example, too much distance for him to cover to actually affect the pass at the catch point. He's close, but just a little bit too much distance on that play. You do see the ability to mirror match, and he's reading off the option route. Like, he's on top of everything that the receiver is doing throughout that route. Losing a route, we talk about the pre-snap, you know, the understanding where he's supposed to be, but again, this is kind of like the Texas one where the tight end receiver shows kind of like he's blocking, so his eyes shift. You saw it against Kansas State. You know, there was a fast motion. All of a sudden, he switched on to the tight end. But as the tight end shows that he's kind of blocking, even though he's kind of chipping and then working into the seam, he shows that he's going to block. So Branch kind of just drops into no man's land. All of a sudden, the tight end takes off. He can't get there, and they complete a pass over the middle. That was similar to the Texas example because he kind of just trusts his eyes and the fact that, okay, that guy's blocking, I'm going to drop out. It's great, but you get small examples like that. Like, it seemed like he knew the assignment. He just saw the guy kind of blocking, so he's like, I'm not going to go up on that, and he kind of dropped out, and then the tight end was able to kind of chip and then work into the seam. And like I said, he's pretty assignment sound in terms of, here's another example. You look at Kansas State. So here's on a stack, right, and you can see he's playing outside leverage. Both routes release inside. He passes it off to the inside, communicates to the inside, and then you see him kind of just float on the edge here, and that's when you see he's able to break down, make the tackle on the running back. He has support from the defender and from the sideline, kind of to what I spoke on earlier, so he's able to be more aggressive. But that's an example where he's able to sit back on the swing route because he understands his assignment. Like, okay, I got outside leverage. Oh, both of them are going inside. Okay, I'm going to pass that to you. I'm going to hold my ground here. And ultimately, it led him to making a tackle and pretty much shutting down a play. Now, when you speak about the zone coverage a little bit more, this is where I think you get very efficient transitions, as I touched on. He's always on his toes, very fast reactions, that kind of thing. I think he's got fast reactions as a blitzer. He gets in pass lanes. He affects wide receiver vision, as I touched on RPOs. He's great at reading body language. This is a huge part for him in coverage. Like, it's excellent. I mean, it's seriously excellent. When you talk about the balance, it's not just like, oh, he's got the movement ability. It comes back to what he's reading. And for him, he reads body language so well, he doesn't get caught up in any of the eye candy. He's like, I'm reading your waist. That's telling me all the information I need. And because of that, you'll get the transition from reading the waist of the receiver to the movement all the way to the eyes. Okay, your eyes looking for a ball, I'm going to find the football. That kind of thing. So I think there's a great example of him reading body language against Texas A&M, where you'll see him kind of read it into the break, sit down with it, receiver looks back for the ball. He immediately sees the receiver's eyes at the break, looks back for the football, and he just gets his hands in the way. There's no way he should have seen that football coming. He didn't. But he read the receiver's eyes, so he stepped in front of it and knocked it away. That is a fantastic example of what I mean there. It's reading the body language of receivers. It's not lunging. It's reading it through breaks, and then also the eyes to anticipate where the football is. And this shows up at the catch point as well. Probably my favorite part of his game as a coverage guy. I absolutely love this, and the countless amount of examples. You just sit back and you're like, this is awesome. This is awesome from a guy that's 21. This is awesome. It's the reads that I see through working through receivers. So when he's playing from that slot role, being able to read through all the way to the number one receiver, the outside receiver, being able to read through that to understand where he needs to be. He plays off coverage well because he can kind of feel where his guy is. He gets contact. You'll see when he flips his head around. He has a good sense of where my guy is while also being able to see other things. The peripheral vision, right? It's being able to feel the quarterback but also feel the man. He has a great sense of that. Like, he seems like he's got eyes everywhere because he kind of like, oh, my guy's here and then I'm going to go here and I can see everything else. This is a fantastic example of that, kind of just putting it all into one. It's that ability to read from the inside out. You saw it running a quarter route and a hitch route. He's able to read through the outside receiver, so when that breaks off, he's able to say, okay, go, you take the corner, I'm diving down to this. He takes away the hitch route against Texas A&M. I think a great example is Kansas State. He forces the quarterback essentially to just throw it away because he breaks on the slant, right? He's able to see the next receiver through his receiver, and he sees when that breaks, and he plays off of that. But at the same time, he has a sense of how his guy is releasing, how his stem is. If that's breaking inside, I got to step in front, take off the leverage. If he's working upfield, I can continue to kind of ride with it, and then once I see that guy break off, I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to drop off underneath. It's being able to do basically two things at once. You got to have fast eyes. Things are happening fast, and he has that. It's why I feel like he's going to be successful very quickly, because it's just like instincts like that. I don't know how you teach things like that. I really don't. Just to do it as well as he does, he just steps in front of slant. Tampa 2, you'll see him work from the middle of the field in safety roles. He aligns a lot of different areas. You'll see him work underneath, though, a lot. Sometimes they put him in safety roles, like a third safety. See it against Tennessee is a good example. Good recognition. He knows where to fill in zone assignments. A lot of Tampa 2 work, but he knows where to fill. And then here you'll see, again, just the toughness. He's going to step in front and just hit this guy. And that kind of transitions into the catch point where he keys off receivers' eyes, as I touched on. He sees their eyes. There's a lot of face guarding going on. So he has to find the eyes. Receiver looks back. He's going to look back for the ball, find it. You saw it against Utah State. They were running a fade. Now, on this fade route, what I do like is that, again, you see the balance at the top of the route here, how he doesn't bite on that inside jab. And then you see immediately as it breaks to the pylon, how his eyes go to the quarterback. But again, as this fade starts to happen, you can see that he likes to crowd that route, push it towards the sideline. However, on this play, you're going to see as the ball starts to kind of get a little bit, I guess you could say underthrown, he gets a little bit on top of the route. He's forced to kind of adapt and adjust. The issue here becomes he starts to, I guess, impede the receiver's area as he starts to press him out of bounds as he's trying to kind of show that he's attacking the football. So that's the biggest thing, is just kind of pulling off a little bit and finding the ball. It's ability there at the catch point to flip around. So if it's like, okay, I can't get it there, I got to flip around my whole entire body to get in position, knock this ball away. That's where I think the flexibility comes into play, like the lower back flexibility. Hey, I'm saying for real, it shows up against the run blocks, but also shows up at the catch point as well. That body positioning is where he wins. He wins at the catch point to me with body positioning. When he loses with body positioning. He doesn't have the fantastic length. He wins with the ball skills to read your eyes and position himself in a spot where you can't get to the football and only I can. That's how he wins. He lacks length at high point. You saw it against his A&M, like this dig route, couldn't get to the football. Even though he's in a position, he doesn't have the length to get to the football. Bigger receiver, he's outreached at the catch point. But he's very accurate fighting through the hands. So you hear that a lot. Oh, attacking the football, that kind of thing. What he does is he plays to the very last second, meaning I can't get my hands on the football out here because my arms aren't long enough. But I can get it when you start to pull it into your body. That's where he gets guys. It's very late. He'll work himself into the hands when you're tucking that ball into your stomach. That's where he's going to rip that thing out. That's where he's accurate, and he's had to win there, win late, because that's where he gives him an issue, is he doesn't have the length to be able to match you outside. So strong hands, yeah, that can be an issue. But he doesn't have the length to knock you to match you sometimes outside. So he has to win with body positioning. And there's some clean examples, ball tracking midair, the interception that he had where it almost looked like he wanted to knock it down, but he just like, I'm just going to pick it off. Like that kind of thing is there, but that's where he has there's a lack of length at the catch point. And again, you tie that back to the off coverage where I feel like sometimes I like to see him press it a little bit more. Sometimes he gets a little bit on his heels against speed receivers from the slot, gets a little bit cautious, and he gives us some receptions that I would like to see him try to get a little bit more closer to not just give up. But those are kind of the knocks there. So for him, he's got to do these other little things to win, and he doesn't. Makes me think of Justin Coleman. Remember Justin Coleman just like ripped everything out late? He was like, I'm going to strip it from you. It makes me think of Justin Coleman because it's like slots do it differently. Not like these big, long arms, I'm going to knock it away at the catch point. Like instead it's I got to rip it out when you're pulling that ball in. That's when I have to get it. That's how he gets it. Continuing, final note here, some of the his transition angles occasionally get flat. What he does is he transitions and he takes the angles to be a ball hawk, which you love. Like you see a lot on out routes, again with the safety elbow over top. We did this a lot last year, right? If it goes vertical, I'll pass to the safety, I'll dip underneath. If it stays underneath, I can jump this underneath out route, so I know I can be more aggressive. There's multiple examples of this. One against A&M where he has a great PBU. So he takes those kind of angles. With that being said, he does arrive early. Now, where the issue to me comes into play, you saw it against Tennessee. The issue to me is he doesn't adjust his angles. So he may jump the route, be in a pretty good position, but he doesn't adapt his angles on the fly. So if the ball's not there and he's already crowding and like basically hounding the route, you'll see him not adapt, and he kind of gets his backhand on the receiver, and that's when he has too many PIs to love. So I feel like, again, the speed covering up the seam. Without help, wide receivers, if they give him like a stutter, he's reading body language. So he's very patient. He's not going to just open up and run. Like, you rarely see. He's going to stay patient underneath, especially with help. You're not getting underneath on him. But he's very patient. He protects inside leverage. He'll step in front of inside breaking routes with inside leverage because he's reading your body language. But, example, Texas A&M. Receiver gets him a little stutter, and he's able to get over top, and he can lose a step as he needs to kind of lean on that help. I think he's a tad stiff in this area. I think he's a little bit stiff trying to open up, run with the receiver, up the seam, that kind of thing. I think he gets a little stiff. Sometimes you see extra steps in that transition. That is part of the reason I think you couldn't necessarily put him at outside corner all the time, because he's a little bit stiff for some of those transitions. So he plays a little bit better, I think, with leverage. But that's one thing that I know, and also the deep speed. Of course, that's a huge part of it. But you can see it. He'll lose sometimes an inside leverage. He'll lose a step because his pad level will rise. He'll get some extra steps. But sometimes he can lose that leverage because he's a little bit stiff when he's trying to open. So he's more so better just stepping in front and taking it away than he is at that fluid transition, open to hips, turn, run. I don't think the acceleration's great in that sense, and that's where he can lose a step against really fast receivers. I think he's more quick than fast, and he's a little bit tight, I think, in those spots. Nothing crazy, but I think he's a little bit stiff there. Little tuggy, which is an issue when he's trying to match and he's in trail. So once he gets caught and he's a step behind, he's in trail position. Sometimes I think he gets a little bit too grabby. He's trying to kind of slow it down, and he gets a little bit too grabby on the arm or the jersey if he can get a hand of it. He'll kind of try to slow it down. Same thing shows up when he's trying to find the ball. If he's in trail and he's working the seam and he's looking back for the football, slows down at all. Now the receiver creates more space. He becomes a little bit grabby, trying to get his eyes back to the ball. So for me, it'd almost be better if he could play a little bit more, patient in trail and just keep playing to the receiver. But you do like that he understands he wants to get contact on the receiver before he gets his eyes back. You just don't like the little grabs in there. So while I absolutely love the way that he reads body language here, the quarterback's not even looking at his route, but he's jumping it just based on that body language of the receiver. But again, it's arriving a little bit early without hounding, which I think is going to be a big part of it. You love that he crowds the routes. Here, I love the stick recognition. Understanding this is 4th and long, he's starting to get depth with the little stutter. Otherwise, he may play this a little bit more up towards the receiver, but understanding the situation, he starts to get depth early. Now, there were some big-time coverage breakdowns against Tennessee. Here you see him working the slot. Really nice with safety up over top. But I think a majority of them came from the safety position. However, plays like this where you see one cornerback thinks maybe we're supposed to switch this, safety's not getting over top. He seemed completely locked in to his assignment. Definitely thought there were some safety breakdowns here, but again, when you have those communications with some of the, switch releases during the play, sometimes you like to see maybe just more vocal. And like I said, I think he can give a little bit too much room outside leverage. You saw it against Hyatt when he ran the slant, scored the touchdown on him. Not having necessarily the burst or the acceleration on those transitions to meet the ball in time. You saw it against ULM. They hit him on a slant as well. And again, some of those speedy receivers, he can get a little bit like, okay, I'm not going to let you get me over top. And then you get him against bigger, slower receivers, he'll be like, oh, I'm getting aggressive, and he'll shut it down. So that's the thing there. Sometimes you like to see him pick up some of the aggressiveness, but you understand when he doesn't have help why it becomes that. But again, it's not like a huge red flag. It is something, though, that does pop up when you watch him. I think he needs to press the stem sometimes a little bit more. Drives early again, just maybe more so adjusting his angles rather than hounding the receiver and getting up on his back. And then again, the transition, I love it because there's really no wasted movement. And then when you see him roll to a deep safety position, his instincts are there, the movement skills, the angles that he takes. You saw good movement on this example where he's basically taking away the deep post route. The quarterback is forced out of the pocket and he kind of stays on top. The sense of routes, the willingness to come down and hit. Like, he could play a safety alignment even though he didn't do it much, especially split safety. His understanding to cover less ground quicker than fast. I think for him, he's a guy that could ball track, play a safety alignment, though I think he's going to play in kind of the same role that he played right now at the next level. Final example I want to show you is against Ole Miss, and it's back to the FBI. It's just the game within the game for him. Ole Miss runs a pitch play to the running back, right? The first time they run the pitch play, it happens, okay, boom. Second time he sees it, as soon as that running back takes that jab step outside to run the pitch, you can see the offensive line kind of crash even though they break back out. He is all over it. He sees that step by the running back, and he's like, I'm getting back there. He jumps it, tackle for loss, and you're like, look, he saw it the second time just like Texas. Now he's blowing it up. They hit him with a third time, but the offense gets smart. They say, hey, look, he's trying to jump that. What if we fake it? They fake the toss. He jumps it, and then all of a sudden, there's a little bit of a breakdown in the back end in coverage, and they run that corner route behind him, and they complete a pass. They do it a fourth time, and on the fourth time, he gets back, and he's like, hey, I got it now. Fourth time, he wants to jump, but he doesn't immediately take off. Immediately communicates, like, hey, take the inside receiver. He's doing that darn corner route. Safety, you take it. Now, safety's dropping deep middle, so he doesn't actually take it. He knows he has to get back in his zone assignment. So what he does is he communicates immediately. Then he's like, it like clicks in his brain like, oh, I've seen this before. He starts to drop. He immediately drops up to cover the corner route and force it down underneath. That's the kind of thing that you get with this play. You saw it against this team, right? They stack up 4 receivers, and it's almost just like, hey, man, I see this alignment. They're throwing a screen here. I'm jumping this before it even happens. He takes off as soon as the snap is made, fighting through blocks, and he's able to kind of kick it outside, limits the block effectiveness, and it's shut down for a short gain. That's what you get from the player, right? It's like he can't get beat the same way twice because he's stinking, man. You could tell he's understanding what he's seeing, and there's just kind of the instincts to his game. That's why I think he's going to be very successful in the NFL. It's plays like this. Watch him go lead block for Tennessee on an interception. He doesn't need to do that, but he goes out there and he lead blocks. Like, unselfishness. That play, like, to me, is like, that's unselfishness. Other guy picks it off. I'm going to go get you a lead block on the offensive line. It wasn't like he lit up the offensive line. The offensive line was falling over. But he blocked him. He didn't need to, but he did. And those are the kind of little things. So while, like, when you watch, you see little pursuit, and I'm like, ooh, okay, is he kind of, like, not playing hard? But then you see the other things, and you're like, man, he gets it. He's unselfish to me. He's smart. I just think that this guy's going to work out at the next level, man. And I will not be shocked if we come back 1-2 years later, we're like, dang, this was definitely the best player that we drafted. Like, this guy was a dog. I get a St. Brown sense here. We took St. Brown. It's just like everybody was like, man, St. Brown's going to be good. We know this. I get that sense with Brian Branch. Like, he's going to be good. This is a safe pick. He's going to be a good player. I don't know what his immediate role is going to be with CJ. Honestly, I don't really care either. I mean, we got the player. It's more about, what's it going to be the next 4 years. The special teams role is going to be there if you want it. He did win Special Teams Player of the Week with a punt return touchdown, even though he didn't really do that much. He did have one. He took it back to the house, so I guess that's possible. But more so, the way that he plays as a tackler and some of the toughness that he plays with, I think he'd be a really good special teamer if that's where you wanted to start him. But a young player, very young player that played in a big-time role for Alabama, and he played well. I love this draft pick by the Lions. I think it got to a point where it's like, hey, we don't maybe need it right now, but he's still there. We're going to go get him. I gave him a good grade, and a lot of the athleticism, movement skills, I think he plays the game very fast. Now, in terms of make plays on the ball, I think you get some good and some bad here, so it's like a slightly above average grade. I love the way that he plays the run. It's my highest grade is pushing the elite category, but again, it's similar to kind of the linebacker. I don't have a lot of low grades here. I mean, the lowest grades I have are really, press man, really somewhat ball skills, just because he gets too many PIs, but there's not a lot of low grades that I really have. Some of the closing acceleration I don't think is outstanding, but he limits so much of the transition that it's good. So to me, there's really not a lot of bad grades that I've given here. I think this guy's a high floor player. I love the draft pick. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.